Hello, everyone. Welcome and good afternoon. This is the Renfrew Center Foundation's webinar, A Story of Hope and Empowerment, a conversation with alum Gina C. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Erin Birely, and I am your Alumni Services Coordinator, and I will be moderating today's online presentation. So before I introduce you all to our presenter today, Renfrew Alum Gina, I do want to go over a few announcements and give others a little extra time to join, as we understand not everybody's jumping on right at 12 o'clock, usually coming from something. So we're super excited. This is our kickoff to our spring webinar series. So as you can see on this slide, we have many webinars coming up throughout the month. We've got a range of topics and presenters over these next few months. So check out our events page at renfrewcenter.com, see which ones interest you, and you can log on, register online for those, and we'll give a reminder email right before. So feel free to register as far in advance as you are able to. And if you have one that you're interested in, but you're worried you might miss, check out our YouTube page because you can see old ones up there. We are also still hosting our residential alumni support group monthly, with the next meeting scheduled for Tuesday the 20th. These run from 4 until 5 p.m. And then we'll be meeting again in March on Tuesday the 19th. Near the end of February, we'll be hosting our annual winter alumni workshop, both in person at certain sites, as well as having some virtual events for those of you who aren't able to make it in person. So these events are happening on either February 20th or 21st, site depending, and we'll be discussing how to handle the winter blues we all experiencing while also navigating and working to balance that with our eating disorder recovery. So the virtual events are happening both at Eastern times and Pacific times. So depending on where you are throughout the country, figuring out which one makes the most sense for you, and then also seeing what in-person events we have that are close by to you, hopefully. So again, registration for these is also on the events page at renfrewcenter.com, both the virtual and in-person events. In addition to these events, we are also still hosting our free weekly BIPOC group and our virtual outpatient college group, specifically for college students. So these groups are great resources to have to be able to add a little bit more support in those kind of specific communities to help you kind of continue navigating recovery while being a member of these different groups. If you're looking for admission to either of these groups, you can reach out to 1-800-RENFREW, or if you just want to learn more, they're happy to tell you more about these groups. So as I said, registration for these events and more, we've got Eating Disorder Awareness Week coming up at the end of February, and a lot of information on renfrewcenter.com under events for that. So check it out, see what's interest to you and what would be beneficial. And as always, if you feel like you need more support, either now or in the future, you can reach out to us at 1-800-RENFREW just to learn more or see what other support options there are. Following the webinar, we would love your feedback. So you will be receiving an evaluation form via email that is very easily completed online. And this evaluation form is really helpful for us because it helps kind of guide what are like new programs that we could do, what's an innovative topic we can cover that we maybe haven't done in a webinar before, and really there to help us best assist you in your recovery. So definitely take a moment just to fill that out so we know how best to continue to help and support you in recovery. We'll be doing question and answers following Gina telling us a little bit about her time in treatment and recovery. And you can submit questions at any point in time during the webinar by typing them into the chat function. Just make sure when you're doing the chat function, it's going to all panelists, not to everyone. That way your question is just going to us panelists and not being seen by everyone. So now I would like to introduce you to today's presenter. So Gina C is an MSW and LCSW and is an alum of the Renfrew Center of Coconut Creek from 2002. Gina has been a school social worker for 17 years and is also a licensed clinical social worker with a small private practice. She has a 17-year-old daughter and is living her life eating disorder free now. So now I will pass it over to Gina.
Hi, everyone. Um, I'm so glad to be able to do this and to share my story. Thank you to Erin. Thank you to Renfrew for allowing me this time to be able to share my story. It's been a long journey. I'm just going to kind of go back to where it first started and how my journey developed. I probably my first memory of anything body image, weight related began at the age of 6. I was in gymnastics. I began gymnastics at about 3 years old. And my very first memory of anything weight related, like I said, was a gymnastics coach had come up to me and said, in a very nice way, in what he thought was being funny, that I had a beer belly. He's like, "Oh, you have a little beer belly." And being naive and being 6 years old, I didn't really know what that meant, but I knew it wasn't good. And I knew that it was about my body and um, it was negative, and this would kind of have me hyperfixate over my stomach for the rest of my life, basically. So I continued doing gymnastics. I loved it. It was kind of my passion. I did it competitively from the time I was 3 till I was 13 when I had an injury, and I was kind of forced to quit. But um, it was very much part of my life, and I, as good as it was for me with my confidence, it was also a little bit negative since it is a sport that is solely revolved around body and looks, and we were weighed every day at our gym, and there was a lot of attention towards weight and body. So that probably wasn't the best for me, seeing that I had a lot of characteristics that would lead to an eating disorder. Um, I like to think that I feel like anyway that my eating disorder was kind of dormant in me for many years, and like it can be for many of us, and all it takes is that one little spark to kind of trigger. And for me, it was that coach making that comment, and then a host of other things. You know, I grew up um, with my mom, and I was very close to my grandparents that lived next door to me, and you know, it was a constant hearing of them on a diet, hearing my mom and grandma weighing themselves, comparing themselves to other people, you know, hearing numbers on scales. And, you know, it just kind of was always in the back of my head that that was a negative and something I did not want to happen. Um, I also struggled very much so in school. I had pretty bad social anxiety. So school was not a thing for me, which is ironic because I now work in one. But it was a challenge for me just being in school. So I was bullied a lot. Because of being quiet, I didn't have a lot of friends. So gymnastics really was my passion because it was the one thing I felt really great at. So when I did quit gymnastics, it kind of felt like who was I? I didn't really know who I was, and I think that's a huge part of those that are struggling with eating disorders is kind of figuring out who we are, what is our identity, and that, of course, that feeling of not having control. And that was a huge piece of my life that was gone. And then at the same time, I'm struggling in school. Um, I don't have a lot of social support. My family was great, but I didn't have that social outlet. I continued through high school struggling, and still, like, I'm not engaging in eating disorder behaviors. It's always in the back of my mind. I'm always judging what I look like. I'm always thinking about it. But at that time, I hadn't engaged in the behaviors. Um, Senior year, I actually went to my first day of school, and I drove home, and I told my mom I'm dropping out of high school. And she was like, "Okay," and I'm like, "No, I'm going to go to college." I had gotten so behind with high school from just my challenges with social anxiety and not having a lot of support that I was really behind. So I ended up quitting, getting my GED, And I said to my mom, I'm not done. I'm going to go to college. My plan is to finish college. So I did. I went on to junior college, and I got myself in a good position. I really, pushed through the social anxiety stuff, and I was able to get into universities after. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to go away to school, um, so that was something I really wanted that I didn't get to do. And this is where the eating disorder behavior started to really begin. I felt really lost. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I didn't get to go away to college. My grandfather at the time, who I was incredibly close to, was dying. He had COPD and emphysema, and I was watching him for quite a few years, very ill. And that was hard to watch. And I was in a relationship that wasn't sure where it was going. And it just, that feeling of not having control really kind of took over. And I didn't have gymnastics, but I had the gym and I started working out a lot, and I started just focusing on my weight and what I could control at the time, which was my body and weight. And I just got really ill, and it was most of my 20s. Um, Basically all of my 20s were basically gone with the eating disorder. It became a really dark, lonely place. I was able to go to university, obviously. I got my bachelor's degree. I did that while I was sick somehow. Um, I commuted to school. It wasn't, what I had wanted to do, but I made the best of it. And I was able to get my bachelor's of social work. Um, but the year prior to getting my degree, I was in outside counseling, and my therapist said, "You need to go somewhere." And she had actually done, I believe she had done an internship with Renfrew, and she highly spoke of it. And she said, "I think you need to go to Renfrew, and I think you need to go to Coconut Creek and get away a little bit. Get away from your family, grow some independence." Um, and I went, and um, that it saved my life, honestly. I was there for a short time, but during that short time, it was incredibly helpful, and it just gave me the skills that I needed that I wasn't getting, um, to take back home with me and to put into place. And by no means was that um, easy, or recovery is not linear. There's so many setbacks and so many challenges we face, um, and it has not been always been easy. um, I came home, and it wasn't like I magically was okay. It took a lot of work and a lot of therapy and dietitians, and I had to really, notice the triggers of when things are difficult. Um, I ended up finishing school. Um, shortly after shortly after my master's degree, I got pregnant, which was another, it was that right there was a little bit of a trigger. But I went through that, I fought through that, and I have been, not engaged. I've maintained a healthy weight and been eating disorder free for, I would say, about 16 years now at this time. But it hasn't, like I said, it is never linear. It is, you have to keep yourself in check and recognize the signs, and um, be able to get help for sure. Okay.
Thank you, Gina, so much for sharing that story.
Absolutely.
I think it's so important. I'm like reflecting on your story, thinking back now to that gymnastics coach who kind of made that initial comment that obviously stayed with you.
Yeah.
If you could go back and say something to him now, is there anything you would want to say?
Yeah, I would definitely educate him on on how to talk to anyone. Yeah, and the harm that could do to anyone, especially a child. Um, because
Yeah.
I know he didn't mean it with ill intent, but and I think that's kind of what geared me to be a school social worker, as well as all my challenges with school. That, and then also being able to advocate for students, because I've had so many students here with eating disorders, and going through it yourself, you're able to, I'm able to go into the gym, and the PE teachers want to do BMI testing, and I'm able to advocate for that, and not a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's been really good. So I
Yeah.
think I would tell that coach, I would educate the coach and let him know the harm that can be done with comments
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. And I think it's so hard because so many people in our world, like in our culture, especially, just make these comments without even thinking about what the impact is going to be. And like you said, you can sit here now and say, okay, no, he didn't say that being like, man, I really hope I cause an eating disorder in this kid. Like
Right.
he's simply saying it, but that those comments really have impact. And I think it's such a cool like parallel process to be able to now be like working in a school and be able to go to the people who might be making those comments, might be saying, okay, we're going to do a lesson on BMI, and being able to be like, well, what if we did something different and not that?
Yeah, it's very empowering. It feels good to be able to do that.
Awesome. How did you manage, because you talked a little bit just about kind of the diet culture influence in your family, and then kind of coming back, being in recovery, having gone through treatment, and still having that relationship with people who were maybe a little bit still in diet culture.
Yeah, and it happens every day to this day.
Yeah.
Um, it's all about boundaries, setting boundaries. It still happens with my parents to this day. Like I said, my mom will still make comments about food or whatnot, and I have to remind her, you know, this is not good. This is not good for me. It's especially not good for my daughter as well, who I've tried to really, really um, protect with
Yeah.
the different comments and whatnot. So I think it's just about kind of setting those good boundaries.
Yeah. And kind of like you said, I always think it's an interesting thing when we talk about boundaries, because so often it's like, okay, I set the boundary, it's done.
Right.
And it's like, no, no.
Right.
We got to keep checking that boundary line, seeing where the weak spots are. People are always trying to like jump over it and going back and redoing it again and again.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Think, like you mentioned your daughter, what are some of the things that you have done to kind of create a different environment for her growing up than what you experienced?
Yeah, I think I always spoke about, not worrying about what she ate, that there was no bad food. She was never, if anyone ever commented about her food, I would advocate for her. Her father too um, would also protect her from the harmful comments. Obviously, there's only so much you can do because of the world we live in, and we couldn't shield her from all of that. But I tried my best to just let her know that there is no bad foods. She was never, you know, not allowed to eat certain foods or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
I never owned a scale in the house. I never weighed myself. I still to this day don't own a scale. I don't weigh myself. If the doctor needs to know my weight, he could blind weigh me, and that's great. I don't need to
Mm-hmm.
know it. It doesn't define me. I don't care. Um, so yeah, it's kind of the same. I've had that um, where my daughter doesn't have to see those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I think that that's so important, like to recognize this isn't a number I need to know. Like not only having that normalization around food of like, listen, our bodies know what they want and what they need. Like it's gonna tell us, and like we can all think of those times where it's like, no, like I really need more water for whatever reason today. Like, I don't know what it is, but like you're just very, very thirsty. Or those times where you're like, man, I could really go for whatever it might be. And recognizing that's our bodies, communicating with us. And we want to listen to that and honor that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I love the idea of just like not owning a scale. I think having scales in the home is one of the funniest things to me. Like, like it's like, why do you do that? Ooh,
Yeah.
sorry. Got a dog in the room.
Yeah.
Gina, what would you say for those who maybe are struggling a little bit with feeling like recovery is possible?
That are struggling, thinking it's possible, I would say it is absolutely possible. 100%. I mean, it's something you just have to want, obviously. I think that you have to find that motivation to get better, and it is 100% possible.
What do you think helped you? Because you talked about, you were in therapy, you were seeing someone, but you're also like in the midst of schooling and life
Yeah.
and everything else. And you have a
Yeah.
therapist say, hey, I think you need to go down to Florida and you need like, what do you think helped you kind of go along with that and say like, all right, they might be right. Like maybe this is what I need, as opposed to being like, are you crazy? Like I got a life. I can't do that.
I actually think I was so relieved when she said it. You know,
Mhm.
when she said, I finally was like, someone can hear me. Because I think a lot of us will use our body as a voice with this disorder. And that's what I was doing. And nobody was catching it. My family is very, no ill intent with them, but they didn't know what to do. They just didn't know. And, I was getting sicker and sicker, and nobody's saying anything, doing anything. And I think it was a cry for help. And when my counselor finally did say that, it was kind of like, oh, thank you. Somebody
Yeah.
can hear me finally. So it was a relief very much. And it also was kind of a push because I knew I couldn't finish school. I wasn't going to make it. It was getting hard to go to school. And school for me was so important because of everything I did with high school, kind of feeling like I messed up. And um, so that really drove me to my recovery. And honestly, wanting to be a mother was probably the biggest thing because I wanted so badly to be a mom.
Yeah.
And I knew I couldn't with this illness. So
Mm. Yeah.
it was a
Well, and
motivation.
yeah. Well, and it is such an interesting thing to think about it, as in that moment being seen. Somebody saying, like, I see you, I see the pain you're in, I see what you're trying to communicate, and like, I hear it, and let's do something about it. Let's not feel this way all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very, very like profound when we can kind of think about it that way.
Yeah.
Um, you've obviously been working in your recovery for a long time now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you notice that like there are still thoughts that come up? Do you notice like those eating disorder thoughts or urges kind of peeking in at times? And if so, what do you do?
Yeah. Sure. I mean, like I said, it's gonna come back. It's something that you're gonna always kind of have struggle with, but you just have to be conscious of it, in times of high stress, absolutely. When things are really rough, having a really hard time, and there's plenty of things that through the years that I've encountered. Um, but I just kind of remind myself of those days, those lonely times, and this I call it my sick time. When I was sick, it was so lonely, so painful, and I also know that I couldn't be doing what I'm doing now and have what I have now if I was sick again. So it's just when you get those urges, what I tend to do is I don't allow myself to do it anymore. When I work out, I work out now, but I work out in a healthy way. I work out for fun. I actually started doing a few years ago before the pandemic. Actually, I started what I always wanted to do was run marathons, and not in an eating disordered way. I wanted to do it for you know the fun of it and just for to part of my gymnastics, history and whatnot. So I did something called the Warrior Dash, and it's pretty intense. You do obstacles and you run, and it had no motivation of weight. or weight loss. It was all about just me feeling good about myself. And if I was sick, I could never have done that warrior dash because I needed strength to do it. I needed food in me, I needed energy, and I needed muscle. And it was really, it meant a lot to finish that warrior dash and to do those marathons because I was finally exercising for the right way, for the
Yeah.
right things.
Yeah. How do you still work on like balancing knowing that like, okay, this is coming from a place of recovery and from enjoyment and from like satisfaction as opposed to, oh, this might be a little bit more about the eating disorder or things like that.
Yeah, I think it's just being really self aware. And when you get caught in those moments of like, I could do a little more at the gym, just, that's probably not the wisest thing to do. And just stopping it and knowing your limits, I think, is the biggest thing. Not overdoing anything, not pushing yourself past, when you shouldn't be working out, when you're
Yeah.
sick, when you're tired, giving yourself a break.
Yeah, also I feel like often it's like a level of kindness that we need like within those pieces of getting back into being active, having activity as part of our lives because we know that that's part of life, right? Like we want to be active. There's a lot of enjoyment from it and that idea of kindness to say to ourselves, I can enjoy these things and it doesn't mean I'm going to do them all of the time. Like there's going to be times where it's like no, I like there's a new episode out of that show I really like. I'm gonna stay home. I'm gonna put that on. I'm gonna be in my sweats and feel good about that.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the recovery piece when you know that your whole life isn't revolving around food and exercise. And because like I said, I missed out on my 20s, a whole decade of my life. And it's sad. It's sad that it caused that, but I can only move forward. And
How do you work on like kind of managing that grief? Because I think that is something that, comes up a lot of times in recovery and especially in treatment is like, okay, I'm doing all of this and I have to come to terms with what I did while I was in my eating disorder or what I didn't do while I was in it that I wanted to do. And that feeling of kind of, I missed out on things. I wasn't as present in these moments, or, I didn't enjoy this the way I thought I was going to, or whatever it might be. But kind of thinking with your own and with that kind of, I feel like I missed out on a decade of my life. How do you kind of manage that grief moving forward in recovery?
I think it's taken a while, and obviously through therapy. And it took a while for me to even realize that I missed it, you know?
Mhm.
Kind of looking back in retrospect, I'm like, oh, it kind of took me, making some mistakes in my 30s, some different things with like relationships and whatnot, just because I missed out on my 20s. Your
Mhm.
brain is still developing. There's different things that are, didn't happen for me. And I think I just allowed myself to be sad over it, allowed myself to put things in perspective and realize I can't get that time back, but I can move ahead and it's still okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that allowance you kind of said, like, let myself be sad about it, let myself grieve it, because it makes sense that we grieve those things, and then thinking about, okay, and what do I want to do continuing to move forward? Kind of
Yeah.
having that forward progress, that kind of forward mindset.
Hmm.
Yeah. Are there things, oh, sorry, were you going to say something,
Nope.
Gina?
Mm-mm. Nope. Go ahead.
Are there things kind of from the time you spent at Coconut Creek and with Renfrew that kind of still stay with you, whether it's like something somebody said or things you heard or anything like that?
Yeah. It really made a positive impact in my life. And like I said, it was a short time I was able to stay, but to this day, yeah, it really. I will still go back in times of like high stress, like you had said, how do you keep yourself in check? I have my Renfrew folder still from when I was admitted, and still in peace with all my stuff in it, my little yellow meal plans and whatnot. And I'll look back at them and remind myself of, okay, there's times you get off, you know, track of food and struggle a little bit. Okay, let me bring it back, and maybe I need to look at my old meal plans again and remind myself of what's that structure was really helpful to me. Um, and then look at my, different things that I did, different activities and things like that. So yeah, I still have my folder, and I will look back at it time to time
Well,
for
that's
sure.
great. How do you kind of, because you talked, you said this, like it hasn't been a linear recovery for you because it doesn't exist for anyone. And that there are those times where you're like, yeah, I'm a little off track. Like I got to look back at that. What do you think has helped you almost give yourself grace in those moments? Because I think that's one of the hard things. Like I talk so often with clients or group members about, I did treatment. I should be better by now. I already know the skills. I know the meal plan. And yet we we fall off track sometimes. Like
Yeah.
we're not on it. And anything that's helped you kind of give yourself grace in those moments or kind of accept them.
Yeah, I've just kind of reminded myself that it's not going to be easy. I think I've just known that for a long time. So just letting myself realize this is not just magic where you recover. It takes work, and it's I think it's something you have to remind yourself every day that you have to stay on, um, because it doesn't just magically go away. So being kind to yourself, letting yourself know this is not easy. And I think also it's really easy for people to forget what you struggled with once you look normal and look better. And you sometimes have to remind people that I'm not okay just because I am a normal weight, or I still have these thoughts in my mind. And so I think really advocating for yourself as well.
Any ways that you have worked to advocate for yourself? I'm thinking of other
Yeah.
teachers I've worked with or had in groups, and sometimes the cultures in schools can not be the most conducive. And so I'm thinking in your environment as well, like anything that's helped you with that advocacy and kind of empowering yourself to stand up.
It took me a while. It took me quite a bit of time to be able to do that. And I can think of so many different situations where I've had teachers come into my way, walking down the hall. Oh, you lost, gained, whatever it might be. I'm like, leave me alone. um, and it would get in my head, but I started to just speak up finally. It took a long time. And I think it's just about kind of gaining that confidence and um, realizing that you need to do it for yourself, and because it gets in your head, and nobody should be able to get in your head like that. I've also, like, at the gym, it's a perfect place for comments, and you have trainers that come up to you and, oh, what are you working on? And it took me many, many years to get the courage, and I think that's what it is courage for me, to finally say, I'm actually okay. I have a workout. No, thank you.
Mhm.
So I think being assertive was a huge, huge thing. And I think people with eating disorders tend to struggle with assertiveness. We could be people pleasers and not want to hurt people's feelings. And oh my God, what if I offended, the guy at the gym? Putting yourself first, finally, is a huge piece of that.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's so hard because, we're humans are social creatures. We want to be accepted. We want to be part of the group. It's biologically hardwired into us to like, look, let's not be the odd man out because that's who doesn't get like, the hunter-gatherer days. Like that's who didn't get to hunter-gather. Like,
Right.
um, what do you think helped you kind of find that confidence, like you said, to be able to stand up for yourself, to be able to say, to the teacher, like, I'm not going to talk about this, or to the guy at the trainer at the gym, like, I'm actually good. I feel comfortable with what I'm doing. I don't need any support in this.
Yeah, I think it took me being really recovered, first of all, to be clear headed enough to do that and to not want to have people affect me anymore because it would affect me and I would think about it and perseverate on it and like, what do they mean? And I decided not to let anyone take that much power over me anymore
Mm.
and not to be embarrassed of it as well. Not to be embarrassed to tell my story to people. For a long time, it was kind of like, well, I'm not going to let anybody know that I had an eating disorder. I'm like, what am I embarrassed of? I should be proud of what I've overcome.
Hmm. Yeah. I think that is such a hard piece. Like I'm thinking about for Eating Disorder Awareness Week, Renfrew's theme is like in our empowerment era.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking about, a lot of times working with group members around Eating Disorder Awareness Week, we're talking about like, okay, what are ways we can empower ourselves to advocate, to be more open, to talk about things. And yet that is such a hard thing to do, to let people in and say, I have struggled in this way.
Yeah.
What do you think it was for you that initially made it really hard or felt like it brought up that embarrassment to be open about the eating disorder?
I think initially, like right out of treatment and whatnot in those early years of recovery, I think it was more that I felt like a pressure, like they would be watching me or watching my body or that kind of thing, or I would let it out and then everybody would know, and I'd be kind of like watched more, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. Um, and I think it was letting go of the eating disorder. I think it was that, I think probably it was a little piece of it holding on to it still, where like if I don't have to tell everybody, I still had it, I can still do it, type
Mm-hmm.
of a thing. And I think when you let it go fully, that's a huge piece. Is
Yeah.
I'm just gonna come clean about it, and it's not to be embarrassed about, and I'm not going back to it, so I don't have to worry about talking about it, being
Yeah.
judged, and yeah,
Yeah. I'm remembering someone one time said like when they would talk about their eating disorder and like give a piece of information, they were like, I felt like a kid that was like, here, you can play with this toy because I've got this other one behind my back. Like they were still holding on to a piece of it.
very much
And
so. Yeah.
yeah. And so it sounds like for you, it was very much like when I finally was like, okay, I don't need to keep it a secret so that I can go back to it one day, that was when it kind of was like, I don't need to be embarrassed about this. Like this is a part of who I am.
Yeah, definitely.
How have you managed, because I know like this has come up before with other alums we've had who are parents of kind of balancing, do I tell my kid about my eating disorder? Do I not tell my kid about like how much do I tell them? Like that balance of what do I do here?
Yeah, that's a tough one for sure. I think it can be, yeah, that's a very tough
I'm
one.
like, there's no right or wrong answer to
Yeah,
this. Like
no,
it's
for
always
sure.
like it depends.
Yeah, I think it's so individualized. Um, in my case, my daughter just kind of figured it out. um, I keep pictures and whatnot, and she saw pictures, and also she's pretty insightful, and she noticed certain things, certain weird habits I had, and you know, um, there was one day that she actually had said to me when she was little, and I was still really in recovery mode, better, but still, recovering.
Yeah.
And she said, "Mommy, I never see you eat ice cream with me, and why don't we ever eat ice cream together?" And that kind of that was a little bit of a sign, like, okay. But
Yeah.
yeah, it is difficult. I have shared with her, part of it she figured it out, and I did tell her, and I told her my history, and I think that's been helpful to her, and she's been a kind of a strong advocate as well with like eating, and if she hears people's comments, so she's very much, you know, anti dieting and all of that. So it's been nice to see her do that.
That's so, I mean, you're hitting on so many interesting points. Like one, just the way people and especially kids are so much more perceptive than we realize, like that they're picking up on things and how helpful it can be to almost have that honesty sometimes from them of like, oh, I don't ever eat ice cream with you, do I? Like,
Yeah.
and like recognizing, okay, I'm missing out on that moment of connection,
Yeah.
because you think about it and you hear your daughter say that, and what she's saying is, Mom, why don't we connect in this way?
Right.
Like, and
Definitely.
and and it kind of puts things in perspective. And then also that way you kind of, your actions of going to treatment, working on your recovery, like continuing to work on it when it gets hard, because we all know it does, like the ways that that is breaking this cycle, kind of thinking about, you grew up in this family that was pretty entrenched in diet culture, as a lot of families are, like, especially like the further back you go, like the more entrenched it kind of gets.
Yes.
Um, and then now, just thinking about it kind of two generations away, you've created this culture of anti-diet, of food normalization, of intuitive eating, like where your daughter's, sitting with her friends, I'm imagining being like, that's stupid. Like your weight doesn't matter. Like being
Definitely.
able
Mhm.
to kind of see that cycle breaking over time is so must be such kind of a cool feeling to have.
It is. It is. It's very nice feeling.
Yeah.
Definitely.
How do you feel like you continue to kind of, one of the things we always talk about at Renfrew is that an eating disorder is it's a disorder of emotion, like, yes, we've got these very specific behaviors that the DSM nicely lines out for all of us.
Mhm.
And at its core, we know it's not about the food. We know it's not about the body. It's about what's underneath that, what's the emotion kind of at the heart of it. Um, and kind of thinking about, the skills you've learned, the practice you've had in recovery. How do you notice that continuing to play a part like in other areas of your life when those maybe difficult emotions come up or that desire to avoid kind of comes up?
Yeah. I just make sure that I don't partake in the eating disorder behaviors. I really try to express myself, feel the emotions. Where I feel like when I was sick, I numbed myself, um, which is so easy to do. But I feel like I allow myself to feel.
Yeah.
Fine.
I, I think, that idea of numbing, like we all have so many ways of numbing.
Yeah.
And, whether it's the eating disorder behaviors that like we very clearly are like, I can't go back to that, or just even recognizing how like, yeah, when I'm just like doom scrolling on my phone, am I numbing out to something? Is there something else going on? And being able to recognize those and have that kind of growing awareness, it almost sounds like, of like, okay, we're not going to avoid, we're going to let ourselves feel these emotions.
Yeah.
Were there any emotions that you felt were like particularly difficult or more difficult to kind of let yourself feel and get okay with feeling?
Um, yeah, I think like the grief of the years lost, like we had talked about, definitely. Um, that was a huge piece. Um, I think my grandfather passing away was another huge piece because he was so close to me, and it was right at that time that I was ill. So that whole feeling and just different aspects of life that I um, kind of like what I had talked about in my thing with school and not finishing high school. I think coming to terms with that and really letting myself feel that, which I think I numbed out for a number of years, um, was a big thing for me.
Yeah. I feel like grief is often such a difficult one for all of us, which always it always intrigues me because it's like, it's part of life, right? Like we're going to experience grief, and yet so many of us, like whether we're struggling with an eating disorder or not, struggle with allowing ourselves to feel grief and that sadness. um, and yeah, I think that that can be a difficult one. Anything that helped you kind of accept it?
Um, I don't think I was able to really like fully do it until I got into recovery,
Mhm.
obviously. But obviously eating eating helped me, and like being clear-headed, and I don't think you can do that until you start to nourish yourself and take care of yourself. So I think that was a huge piece of it. Just getting myself well allowed me to be able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely see that so often, like when we're numbing out in some way, like there's not a way to kind of let ourselves feel something while also still trying to stay partially numb. Like
It's almost
it's
impossible. Yeah.
yeah, it's like trying to warm up while we've got like half our body out the door. It's like I,
Yeah.
no, and it,
Happening.
either in either the Maryland or the Chicago winters, like it's gonna be bad.
Yes.
You're
Yes,
gonna stay cold
definitely.
for sure. Um, what do you think, again, kind of going back to the Eating Disorder Awareness Week theme of empowerment, what do you feel like are the things you still use as like your tips to kind of empower, or your tricks to like empower yourself in these moments?
The moments of like struggling or
Hmm.
yeah. A huge piece of it for me is just like positive self-talk and just remembering that that the eating disorder does not equal happy, healthy. We like to trick ourselves and think that we're going to be better or happier when we're less or in our eating disorder. So kind of a constant reminder of no, that wasn't a happier time. That was actually a lonely time, and I actually missed out on a lot. So just reminding myself of that
Yeah,
is a huge piece.
yeah, yeah. Well, and I love that idea of that self-talk, because I think a lot of us forget we're constantly talking to
Mm-hmm.
ourselves.
Oh yeah.
Like we're always talking to ourselves, and like
Mm-hmm.
when we don't have awareness of it, it's sometimes interesting what we're saying, like
Definitely. Yeah.
without even realizing it. And so bringing some awareness to it and noticing, like, when am I getting really negative with that self-talk? When am I beating myself up and not even paying attention to it? And if I said these things out loud to myself, would I still say them?
Mm-hmm.
Or like, would I speak differently to myself, and working to kind of change that? And I always like to remind people, like, we can't, it's not always easy to jump from negative self-talk straight to positive. And like, I saw your face of like, yes, that is tough. But that
So
idea of, can I even work on just like neutral statements?
yeah.
Instead of telling myself, I'm such an idiot for running late to this meet up with my friends or something. Like, I'm so stupid. Why can't I ever leave on time? Making it more neutral. I'm really upset. I'm late. These people matter to me. I cherish this time with them. I'm upset, you know? Yeah. One of the other things I think that always comes up in treatment and as people are working in their recovery is this idea of, um, the eating disorder is part of our identity. It's been our comfort, it's been our support, our protector. It's been kind of controlling our lives a lot of times for longer than we even realize, like longer than the behaviors have been there. Kind of like you said, it grows over
Yes.
time. Um, and that idea of kind of thinking of clients who have struggled with, well, who am I going to be without this? When I don't have this, who am I, and what do I do? What do I think about? How did you kind of work on kind of coming to terms with that, or accepting like this doesn't have to be my identity anymore?
Yeah, that was a very difficult one because it very much was, and it's scary. It's scary to let go of it because there is such a strange comfort in it. But I think realizing that I'm more than that. I'm more than being sick. I'm more than being anorexic, whatever it might be. But I think figuring out who I was a huge piece, and I couldn't do that until I was better. And then I did. I was able to figure out who I want to be and what I want to do and how I can change things and help people. And so I think you need to definitely let go of the eating disorder to figure out yourself because it is not you for sure, as much as you feel like it is.
Was there any fear for you kind of in that in between part of like letting go of the eating disorder, but maybe we haven't figured out who we are without it and it's like I'm floating?
Yeah, yeah, very much so. Yeah, and I also, I don't know if I didn't mention this today, but in the middle of recovery, I had a car accident, and it was pretty bad, and that also put some things in perspective of caring about my body and having a second chance at life, and all
Mhm.
of those things. So and that kind of set me back. That was a huge setback in recovery and trying to figure out, okay, now what? Now I physically can't work out, I
Mhm.
can't do these things. So, a piece of me for a little while felt like it chose to get to, I, I I didn't fully wasn't able to choose my recovery. My car accident did,
Mhm.
and I grappled with that for a little bit, but um, that was a challenge. But
Mhm.
yes, it's there's a piece of it where it's like, who am I? Where am I? You know, and it's scary.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. I think it is like it's such a scary idea. And also, and I'm sure you see this with the students you work with and with your own daughter, like it's also such a natural part of life.
Yeah.
Like we don't always know who we are, where we're going, what we're doing. Like there is that kind of figuring it out, like times, I would say, because even once we have it figured out, sometimes then it's like, I don't know that this is actually what I want it to be figured out as. Like,
Right. And realizing that's okay. It's okay to not know, not you know, things change, things happen, and it'll be all right.
yeah, yeah. Well, and I think even, you talked about feeling like in some ways the car accident kind of almost forced recovery upon you, kind of said like, yep, nope, this is what we're doing now because we can't do
Right.
these things. Like, and recognizing like in that moment, you survived without it.
Yeah.
These things that previously, your eating disorder had been telling you, like, you're not, well, you can't do that. You can't not do these different things. And all of a sudden you're not doing them. And you're like, I don't feel great. And like the world hasn't come like crumbling down yet.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You realize that you will be able to go on without it and actually better off.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Gina, I just want to thank you so much for telling your story, having this
Absolutely.
conversation with us today. I feel like it's so important to recognize like when somebody leaves treatment, it's not the end of the journey. There's still so much that can be done, that is done. And the empowerment I think you showed in coming here today and sharing your story and allowing us to ask you all of these questions and like just giving hope that, like things do change, even when they don't go to plan, even when they're not showing up the way you think they're going to, like you can still keep moving forward. And that's such an important piece of recovery is just that idea of I'm just continuing to move forward, even when it feels like I'm being pushed backwards.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
Well, Gina, thank you so, so much for
Thank you so
coming
much for
on
having
today.
me.
Of
Thank you.
course. I'm so happy to have you. Thank you, everyone who joined us for our presentation today. We are so happy that you could be here and so happy to have you, Gina, amongst our amazing alums who are all working so hard in recovery. Thank
Thank
you
you.
all. Have a good
Thank you
rest
so
of your
much.
day.
Bye bye.